So I've read a report in the London Times from yesterday, or the day before actually. It was the weekend edition. But basically, it's a report by Charlie Parker and Rosemary Bennett. And the report is about how British universities are being told how to protect themselves. I'm just reading out the first paragraph here. From interference by foreign powers amid growing fears about the influence of China on campuses. I'm not going to read out the whole report, but the background to this is something that I've been following for a long time. In fact, in my capacity um, as part of my journalism course, I interviewed a young Hong Kong student at the University of Sheffield. I'm not going to name him because he asked me for anonymity for security reasons. But this young student at the University of Hong Kong um, basically told me how he and other Hong Kong students had been really targeted by mainland Chinese students. They'd been bullied, they'd received physical threats. Now, shamefully, the University of Sheffield hasn't expelled a single Chinese student. I did actually contact them at the time, for fairness, so they could have their say, and they never replied. Um, I gave it a few days. I followed up. They didn't reply. Um, I've long felt that our universities, in their eagerness to tap into the Chinese market, have basically sacrificed Western values to some extent. So this report is talking about this new policy that the government's offering of this what says the UK's first comprehensive security guidelines for universities will be introduced by Universities UK, UUK, the umbrella group vice chancellors in the autumn to robustly protect academic freedom, institutional autonomy, and our own values. It instructs university leaders on safeguarding their students, staff, and academic research, the Times understands. Quite frankly, I don't have a very good impression of some of our so-called university leaders. I think, put it bluntly, I think some of them are moral cowards. I think they're more interested in the perception of diversity and getting big money from the Chinese state than actually doing the right thing. Because whenever they respond to the criticism that they're not doing enough, they always tend to retort with our universities need to be outward looking, and in a changing world, we need to look at emerging markets like China. Well, universities in Australia and I believe the United States have already taken steps in this regard. There was really disgraceful footage of some mainland students actively harassing and physically attacking. We're not just talking about name calling here, physically attacking students who were protesting in favor of the Hong Kong movement. So the government expects the number of international students to increase from about 485,000 to 600,000 by 2030. That's all nationalities, that's not just Chinese. With worsening diplomatic rows between China, the US, and Australia set to drive students to UK campuses, senior Tory officials are warning that tuition fees could be used as political leverage. What I'm really interested in, I understand that departments need to be funded. I understand that if a university has, say, for example, an East Asian department or a China department, it needs to be funded. What I'm very concerned about is I think that these vice chancellors and department heads are really willing to take potentially millions from the Chinese Education Bureau in exchange for their complicity. What I mean by that is there is strong evidence to suggest that universities are actively pandering to the demands of the Chinese embassy and the Chinese state in exchange for this money. So, in other words, they will say the Chinese embassy will demand that they don't host talks by the Dalai Lama or Chinese dissidents in exchange for them getting the money to fund their cultural programs and so on. There's long been suspicion about Confucius Institutes. Sweden done the right thing getting rid of them, in my opinion. Once again, the United Kingdom just lags behind other like-minded nations. Sweden, Australia, the United States, all countries that value freedom of expression and democratic ideals. We just drag our heels, you know. The government is, I mean, I don't criticize this, I think it's a good move, but I still think that the Johnson administration needs to be far, far more outspoken than it has been when it comes to China's malevolent influence. Um, and the report cites three examples. I'm trying to hold the paper whilst talking into the screen at the same time. Warwick University. So this is examples of China's campus influence. Student campaign to vote down a motion declaring support for Hong Kong was backed by the Chinese Students and Scholars Association, partially funded by the Chinese embassy. So this is a motion in a British university that was voted down in part because of Chinese state interference. That's what it is as far as I'm concerned. Sheffield University. The university was accused of being complicit in Beijing's crackdown on Hong Kong when its career service advertised opportunities as probationary inspectors for Hong Kong police. This is a police service in Hong Kong that has come under extensive criticism for its brutal tactics and basically acting as an armed wing of the Chinese Communist Party. But to me, the problems of Sheffield go well beyond that. They failed to expel any mainland students for threats or bullying. Instead, they just gave a generic sort of all students must respect each other message. I think universities won't expel Chinese students because they don't want to upset the Chinese embassy. Because the Chinese embassy being run by nationalist so-called wolf diplomats that it is, would immediately turn expelled Chinese students into some sort of martyrs. I don't think they are martyrs. I think they're entitled brats who think they can come to Western countries and behave that way. But you know that's what would happen. If a Chinese student was expelled, the Chinese embassy would immediately claim it's a freedom of expression thing and they're being victimized. And it even, I would not put past them to use the racism card. Um, we need to be extremely careful that the regressive left and the Chinese embassy don't get to control the language here and don't get to frame it as some sort of racist thing. Edinburgh University, the Confucius Institute for Scotland, based at the university, has drawn criticism over undue influence, concerns, and claims that is used to promote Chinese Communist Party propaganda. Well, that's long been a criticism of Confucius Institute. Nothing new about that. Um, and this is an analysis by the London Times. British universities are a global success story. Overseas students and academics flock here, and business is government and rival universities eagerly pursue partnership and joint research programs. The traffic is two-way, with thousands of Britons going abroad. Well, yeah, but far, far fewer than the number of students coming here. I mean, in terms of like the number of British students in Chinese universities is minuscule compared to the number of Chinese students here. Um, British universities have almost total autonomy in dealing with the trickier side of the relationships that brings risks, not least over one of the biggest partners, China. Well, that I think is part of the problem. The fact that our universities have total independence, which broadly speaking, I do understand. You don't want the government always, telling universities what they can and can't do. But the other side of that is I think you have ideological China sycophants in our universities, running our universities, who will turn a blind eye to all the repression, all the human rights abuses, all of that, in exchange for their partnership programs. Now, I'm not saying they need to really come out forcefully and condemn things that are going on, but it does make their position morally compromised as far as I'm concerned. And I'll continue with the report. Its contribution to student numbers and research has been growing fast. It's China. As one of the fastest growing economies with a government eager to invest in education and research, it has British universities lining up to promote their programs. However, the diplomatic winds are changing with alarm over Beijing's reach into Britain. Chinese students make up the largest group of overseas students, and I've had many close dealings with Chinese students, just for the record, um, paying up to three times local university fees. Much research now depends on this cash, fueling fears of financial dependence. Cambridge is now under attack over its work with Huawei. the Chinese telecoms company Oxford stopped taking donations from the company this year. Well done, Oxford. Credit where credit's due. So vice chancellors are likely to welcome guidance that helps them work together without undermining national security or their reputation. I think their reputation's already been damaged. As far as I'm concerned, our universities are looking like a bunch of um, basically China apologists, a bunch of Communist Party stooges. That is how it's starting to come across. And I understand their argument. They want to attract students from around the world, and Chinese students do pay a lot of money. You know, they they save up a lot, they pay a lot of money to study here. And I don't want to, by the way, give the impression that I'm saying all Chinese students are a problem. Many of these young people just want to come here, do their studies, enjoy their life, and get on with things. However, it is irrefutable that there has been an ugly imported nationalism that I am convinced the Chinese embassy has stoked up. Um, and our universities have been just sitting on their hands with this. They're okay with it. I think that what we're actually seeing is the Chinese state using our tolerance against us. Because if we criticize this behavior because it's obviously disrespectful to the host nation, they may have paid a lot of money, but they still have a responsibility to be respectful to the country that they're in. In return, what do they get? They get all the knowledge and all the life experience from the courses that are being offered. They get the life experience of traveling in another country, which is always rewarding. Um, but there is it's a two-way street. And I think this overt dependence that British universities are putting on Chinese investment is setting them up into a trap because it's over dependence. It's a reliability. I mean, yes, China's a major economy, but what about Brazil? What about emerging markets like Indonesia, Vietnam? Why does it have to be so focused on China? And I don't want to be misunderstood here. I don't want a situation where Chinese students just don't come. Okay, I'd be a hypocrite because some of my work involved when I worked as a social assistant at the University of Sunderland in the EAP department, that's English for Academic Purposes. My job was to help show students around, help them settle in, help them practice their English. We go on day trips, Leeds, Edinburgh, places like that. It was a social program. It wasn't really particularly academic. It was fun. I enjoyed it. And most of the young Chinese students were okay. I got on well with them. And, they weren't troublemakers. I'm not suggesting that they were. However, there is very, very strong signs that there is a contingent of Chinese students who think that they can come to Western countries and because they're brainwashed by the state, from being toddlers onwards, they're told to love the motherland and love the party no matter what. So they come over here, they think they have to, wave the flag, and they're not just content having their opinion, they will actively threaten anyone. They will even go to the point of threatening local British students who are sympathetic to the Hong Kong side. And this isn't a new thing, it's been going on for years. Our universities, in my opinion, have for the most part been gutless in terms of dealing with this. At best, they've given generic kind of advice about or warnings about, oh, you must all respect each other. They haven't expelled a single Chinese student for threatening behaviour, even though there's solid evidence for that, not just at Sheffield, other universities as well. And I think that's a disgrace. When the Hong Kong protests were going on last year, there were a lot of reports of Hong Kong students in the UK getting threats from mainlanders. Of course, it works both ways. If a Chinese student is also getting abused, that's wrong. But I don't think it's been working that way. I think the evidence indicates that the majority has been directed at the Hong Kong students and against anyone else who speaks out against the CCP. So these Chinese students need to be reminded you're not in China anymore. Okay? You're guests in this country. Yes, you've paid a lot of money, but you're not here to promote the Chinese Communist Party. If you want to defend them, it's technically your right, but just be aware that if you're going to forcefully do that, you're going to be seen in a very negative light. How would they feel if Britain or an Australian or a Canadian went to China and waved a flag around and demanded respect for the motherland? That's how it comes across. And I think our universities have been complicit in the apathy this country has shown to China's malevolent influence. Some things are starting to change. The government's finally starting to get a little bit more robust. But in my opinion, it's still too little. A lot of respect for MPs like Tom Tugendhat and others who are actively, trying to expose these things and really saying we need to be assertive about this. They're not saying let's just cut off all ties to China. They're not saying let's stop all Chinese students. That's not what they're saying. They're saying we just need to get a lot more assertive. So, for example, I would say, let's welcome Chinese students, but let's remind them that they are guests. And if they behave in any sort of way that's threatening other students, they should be expelled and, in my opinion, kicked out of the country. Why should they? Why should they? Enjoy being in some of the world's, or rather, I'll reword that. Why should they get the benefits of being in some of the world's most prestigious institutions? And that's the sad thing about this. British universities are some of the best in the world with good reason. I'm not just talking about Oxford and Cambridge. Universities like Sheffield and Manchester and Liverpool are all great research institutions, but their reputations, in my opinion, are being badly damaged by their utter pandering to the Chinese state. If you look at the web pages of the China department, nothing but glowing language about how wonderful China is and about how we value this partnership. I'll just read up a bit of a follow up here, or a conclusion rather. Um, Vivian Stern, director of UUK International, said universities value the presence of students from around the world, students who will create global classrooms, lay the foundations for future trade and cooperation, and collectively contribute 26 billion to the economy each year. Universities can and do have to engage internationally with open eyes, protecting academic freedom, institutional autonomy, and our own values. Not enough's been done. Um, a responsible attitude to risk is essential in standing up for the principle of engagement in teaching and research, irrespective of geography or politics. Let me put this bluntly. I just think that what's happening is a lot of our universities don't want to upset the Chinese embassy. I think it's really that simple because they want Chinese money. So they don't want to upset the Chinese embassy by, for example, inviting dissidents to speak, by allowing dissenting views against the CCP, by questioning the role of Confucius Institutes. Because the Chinese embassies around the world behave like thugs. They just make demands. Wolf warrior diplomats are really thug diplomats. This is China's so-called soft power, one of jingoistic arrogance. We can do what we like, where we like, when we like. Our friends in Australia are being assertive. We're not. And I have to say, yeah, there's a patriotic side to this. I do feel angry that my country's being undermined because I feel that's what's happening. And I expect it from the Chinese Communist Party. But what's unforgivable is for British university leaders who are on very big salaries, by the way. They get far more than the Prime Minister. They're just pandering to Beijing to an extent that is absolutely not equal, to the extent where they're just giving them what they want. And they are enabling a situation where there isn't room for dissent. So I get the argument about investment. I'm not dismissing that. I understand that universities need to be funded, but I do worry that it is just too much. That they're just surrendering autonomy to the Chinese state. They're basically acting servants for the Chinese state in everything but name by doing so. They'll deny that, but you know, have they actively said we will take measures to ensure, that the Chinese state doesn't interfere in our freedom of expression, etc., and academic freedoms? No, as far as I can see, they've taken minimal measures. So the government's intervening because it has to. And these university heads, they'll be very cranky when it comes to the government intervening, but they've no problem with the Chinese government intervening because that's their partners and they're selling their souls in the process. So, in my opinion, several things need to happen. They need to scrutinize the Confucius Institute thoroughly. I personally would get rid of them completely, but they won't do that because it'll upset the Chinese embassy. I think they need to be more hardline with Chinese students, those individual Chinese students. I'm not talking about all of them. I'm talking about individual Chinese students who behave in an unacceptable way. I'm not talking about like they say, oh, I support the Communist Party because. I'm talking about if they engage in cyber threats, if they behave in a jingoistic manner. I mean, in my opinion, I think if someone comes to this country and they wave their national flag around and make a lot of demands, that's disrespectful. There's no rules against it, there's no laws against it, and that makes it a bit murky to handle. But I do think they need to be reminded that they're guests. And our universities are so politically correct, they're so, hung up on the woke culture, that anyone who criticizes that sort of nationalism will be accused of being a xenophobic racist. It's repugnant. It's just the moral cowardice that is going on here is infuriating, absolutely infuriating. And I think a lot of our university heads need to get a spine. They need to do the right thing, recognize that the Chinese state has malevolent ends. It may be that individual Chinese universities and Chinese academics have um, decent principles, that they genuinely are just interested in cultural exchanges. For example, let's say there was research into the Tang Dynasty, right? It's innocent, it's just history, it's just something like that. I've no problem with. What I'm talking about is when CCP tries to inject politics into every aspect of life. We need to wake up. This has been going on in Australia, in Canada, in other parts of Europe. We need to wake up. And in my opinion, of the Five Eyes nations, of Britain, Canada, the United States, Australia, and New Zealand, I think we are the most lackluster in dealing with this. I think our approach, for the most part, has been pathetic. If Chinese students are maybe reluctant to go to Australia, that's not because Australia's a xenophobic racist country. It's because of the way they've been behaving in Australia has meant the Australian government has had to take a more robust line. So to be honest, I'm pretty disgusted with the attitude of British universities, too many of them. Some are better than others, but Sheffield to me stands out as one of the worst in terms of pandering to Beijing. And it's just moral cowardice. That's what it is. Final point, some people might say I'm a hypocrite because I've had Chinese students and I've worked in China. So they might say, well, Nathan, you've worked there, you've been paid there. Yes, that's true. But one thing I can honestly say, hand on heart, I have never, ever toed the Communist Party line. And if I was asked to do that, I would have openly said, no, I'm not comfortable doing that. For example, if I've been working over there and they said, oh, we want you to give this lesson praising Chairman Mao, I would have said, that's not what I'm here to do. Sorry, I'm not doing that. You're going to have to, this is going to be an issue. I would, thankfully, that didn't come up. I just had to teach oral English. But I wouldn't have done it. Um, I think you need to have the common sense to retain your autonomy. It's a bit like people who appear on RT have often defended themselves by saying, oh, well, I don't agree with everything the Russian state does, but they fail to realize they're just going to be used by appearing on RT. No matter what they say, they will be used. So I think our universities are being used by the Chinese state. And if these heads really, really do care about autonomy and academic freedom, then they will wake up and understand what the Chinese regime is. I mean, these are not stupid people. They know. And that's what I think is unforgivable. This can't be just dismissed by naivety. I think this is an ideological choice they have made to put money before values. I really do believe that. Because I don't think they're stupid people. I think they know full well that the Chinese they know it's a totalitarian state. They know probably that it has malevolent intentions. They've just decided that they don't really care because they want the money. And it's unforgivable. I don't think it's enough of an argument to say, oh, well, if we don't do this, we won't get the investment or Chinese students won't come here. Okay, that might be a price we have to pay. It might mean losing so many billions, but surely that's better than selling our soul, our national sovereignty, even. If that sounds like hyperbole, you really, really need to look at some of the things that have been going on.